I woke up and everything that was left of my wife was gone. Her art studio, our garage, the easels, 30 years of Sarah's paintings, demolished at 3 a.m. while I slept. No warning, just rubble. The HOA handed me a $2,200 bill with a smug smile, called it an emergency violation for a structure permitted since 1987. Bethany, the president, sneered.
Maybe now you'll fit in with decent people.
As Sarah's final paintings, finished weeks before cancer took her, were crushed into a dumpster. That was their fatal mistake. The demolition company they hired? I own it. Every truck that destroyed her sanctuary, paid for by my own company. They'd used my trucks to bully neighbors for months. I had every contract and lie documented. What would you do if your enemies were unknowingly paying you for the perfect revenge? 3 weeks later, I told Bethany, decent people don't destroy a widower's memories, but they do get exactly what they deserve. I never thought I'd be living alone at 52. Sarah and I had planned everything down to the penny. 15 years in our modest corner house in Maple Grove, dreams of retirement we'd mapped out together. Her art studio in the detached garage was her sanctuary, filled with half-finished paintings and the smell of turpentine that somehow made everything feel like home. Then cancer came calling. 8 months after Sarah's funeral, I was still learning how to make coffee for one, still catching myself buying her favorite yogurt at the grocery store. I kept the garage exactly as she'd left it, easels positioned by the windows, paint tubes scattered across the workbench, that unfinished landscape of our Vermont honeymoon still waiting on the main easel. I made my living running O'Malley Recovery Services, a small towing company I'd built from scratch after leaving construction work. Nothing fancy, just me, 2 trucks, and a dispatcher named Rita who'd been with me since day one. Most folks in the neighborhood had no idea about my business. I kept my work trucks parked at a lot across town, drove a plain pickup at home, and liked it that way. The trouble started 3 months ago when Bethany Kensington Mills moved into the McMansion 2 streets over and immediately got herself elected HOA compliance officer. Bethany was the type who'd never worked a blue-collar day in her life, but had plenty of opinions about how working people should live. She drove a massive white Escalade that probably cost more than my annual income and had the personality of a parking ticket. Her first week on the job, Bethany sent me a violation notice about my non-conforming storage structure. The garage had been there when we bought the house, fully permitted, but apparently it didn't meet Bethany's aesthetic standards for the neighborhood. It's an eyesore, she'd announced at the monthly HOA meeting, gesturing dramatically like she was presenting evidence in a murder trial. Property values suffer when residents treat their lots like junkyards. I tried reasoning with her, showed her the original building permits, explained the garage's historic significance to the neighborhood. It was one of the first structures built when the subdivision opened. But Bethany wasn't interested in history or permits or basic human decency. What really got under my skin was how she'd smile while delivering her threats. That practiced sorority president smile that said she knew exactly how much power she wielded and exactly how little power I had. The violation notices escalated quickly. First, it was the garage's setback issues, then the non-compliant roofing materials. I spent weekends researching HOA bylaws, discovering that most of Bethany's claims were either outdated or completely fabricated. But by then, she'd recruited 2 board members to her cause, Steve and Linda Morrison, retirees who seemed to think HOA enforcement was a competitive sport. My neighbors started avoiding eye contact, not out of malice, but because everyone knew Bethany had it out for me and nobody wanted to become her next target. The smell of Sarah's paint still lingered in that garage, and the thought of losing it felt like losing her all over again. Then came October 15th. I'd driven to my daughter's place in Columbus for her birthday, planning to stay the weekend. I'd locked up the garage carefully, made sure everything was secure. When I pulled into my driveway Sunday evening, the garage was gone. Not a single board, nail, or memory left behind. Just a citation taped to a stake where the front corner used to be. Emergency demolition completed due to immediate safety hazard. Structure removal, $1,200. Administrative fees, $350. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in additional penalties. I stood in my driveway holding that citation, feeling like someone had kicked me in the stomach. Sarah's easels, her paintings, 30 years of shared dreams, all hauled away to some landfill because Bethany Kensington Mills decided they were an eyesore. I spent that first week in what my daughter Katie called controlled fury mode. I'd wake up at dawn, stare at the empty concrete pad where my garage used to be, and methodically plan my next move. Sarah always said I was like a diesel engine, slow to start but unstoppable once I got rolling. My first stop was the county building department. I'd learned long ago that government bureaucrats responded better to polite persistence than angry demands, so I brought coffee and donuts for the staff. The clerk, a woman named Margaret who'd been there since the Carter administration, pulled up the permits on her computer. "Your garage was built in 1987, Margaret said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Fully permitted, passed all inspections. There's no record of any safety violations or emergency orders." I asked for copies of everything. Original permits, inspection records, the works. Margaret printed a stack 2 inches thick and handed it over with a sympathetic smile. "Sounds like your HOA's playing fast and loose with the rules, honey." Armed with documentation, I drove straight to Bethany's house. Her Escalade sat in the driveway, gleaming white and taking up enough space for 3 normal cars. I rang the doorbell, heard the chime echo through what sounded like a cathedral, and waited. Bethany opened the door wearing yoga pants that probably cost more than my monthly groceries and a smile that could freeze antifreeze. "Curtis, what a pleasant surprise." "We need to talk about the garage," I said, holding up my folder. "I've got all the original permits here. That building was completely legal." Bethany's smile didn't waver. "Oh, those old permits? I'm afraid they don't meet current compliance standards. The HOA board voted last month to update our building requirements. Your structure violated at least 6 of the new guidelines." I felt my jaw tighten. "What new guidelines? I never received notice of any board vote." "Check your email," Bethany said with a dismissive wave. "We sent everything electronically to reduce paper waste. Very environmentally conscious of us, don't you think?" That was lie number 1. I checked my email religiously. Came from my construction days when missing 1 message could cost you a job. There were no HOA communications about new building standards, no board meeting minutes, nothing. I spent the next 2 days calling every board member. Steve Morrison hung up on me. Linda Morrison claimed she was too busy to discuss HOA business over the phone. The third board member, elderly Frank Wilson, seemed genuinely confused. "New building standards?" Frank wheezed through the phone. "Bethany mentioned something about updating the bylaws, but I don't recall voting on anything specific. My memory isn't what it used to be, though." I realized Bethany was playing a shell game with the board, presenting vague proposals and claiming unanimous approval for specific actions that were never actually voted on. It was clever in a sociopathic way. My next move was rebuilding the garage. I'd saved Sarah's paintings and most of her art supplies. I'd been storing them in the basement since she passed, unable to look at them but unable to throw them away either. If Bethany wanted to play games, I'd build her a garage so perfectly compliant that even she couldn't find fault with it. I hired my old construction crew to help. Within a week, we'd erected a structure that exceeded every building code by 20%. Better foundation, upgraded electrical, storm-resistant roofing, the works. I even painted it the exact shade of beige specified in the original HOA guidelines. 2 days after completion, I found another citation on my front door. "Structure violates sightline requirements," this one read. "Blocks emergency vehicle access, must be relocated or removed within 72 hours. I walked around my property 3 times, measuring angles and checking clearances. My garage was 10 feet farther from the street than my neighbors. The sightlines were identical to every other corner lot in the subdivision. Emergency vehicles had never had trouble accessing anything. The fire department had used my driveway to reach a house fire 2 years ago." That evening, I drove slowly through the neighborhood, really looking at the other garages for the first time. Bethany's own property had a 3-car garage that was actually closer to the street than mine. The Petersons' garage blocked more sightline than mine ever had. The Washingtons had built an addition that technically violated 3 different setback requirements, but their garages were still standing. I sat in my truck outside Bethany's house watching her load designer shopping bags from her Escalade. The math was simple. This wasn't about building codes or sightlines or emergency access. This was about Bethany Kensington Mills deciding that Curtis O'Malley didn't belong in her version of Maple Grove. What she didn't know yet was that I'd been dealing with bullies my entire life, and I'd learned a thing or two about fighting back. The next morning, I discovered Bethany's new harassment strategy: parking warfare. Her Escalade sat squarely across my driveway, blocking access to my garage and the street. Not partially blocking, completely blocking. like she'd used a measuring tape to position it for maximum inconvenience. I stood there holding my coffee, watching steam rise from the mug in the cool morning air, and felt something shift inside my chest. Bethany emerged from her front door at exactly 8:15 a.m., dressed for what my daughter would call a mommy workout. Designer athletic wear that had never seen actual sweat. She walked to her mailbox, making a show of checking for letters while glancing sideways at my house. "Excuse me," I called across the street. "You're blocking my driveway." Bethany looked up with that practiced, innocent expression I was learning to hate. "Oh my goodness, am I? I'm so sorry. I was running late for Pilates and just parked quickly. I'll move it when I get back." She climbed into the Escalade and drove away, leaving me stranded. I had a 9 a.m. appointment with a potential towing contract, followed by a doctor's visit for my diabetes medication. Both would have to be rescheduled. This became Bethany's daily routine. Every morning at 8:15, she'd park the Escalade across my driveway, claim it was an accident, and promise to move it soon. Sometimes she'd return in an hour. Sometimes it was afternoon. Once, she left it there until 11 p.m., claiming she'd forgotten where she parked. I tried reasoning with her, tried talking to the other board members, tried calling the police, who informed me it was a civil matter, and suggested I file a complaint with code enforcement. Code enforcement told me to call the police. After a week of this, I missed my diabetes medication appointment and had to pay a cancellation fee to my doctor. That's when I decided to fight back with the one tool Bethany hadn't counted on: documentation. I installed security cameras, not the cheap wireless ones from the hardware store, but professional-grade equipment with infrared capability and cloud storage. My construction background had taught me the importance of evidence, and Sarah's battle with insurance companies during her cancer treatment had reinforced that lesson in blood. The cameras captured everything. Bethany's deliberate parking across my driveway, her smug smile when she saw me waiting. The way she'd sit in her car for extra minutes, scrolling through her phone while I stood in my driveway, obviously needing to leave. But Bethany's next move surprised even me. She filed a harassment complaint against me. "Mr. O'Malley has installed surveillance equipment pointed directly at my home," her complaint read. "I learned about it when a county sheriff's deputy knocked on my door Thursday evening. This constitutes stalking behavior and violates my family's reasonable expectation of privacy." I invited Deputy Rodriguez inside, showed him the camera angles on my laptop. Every camera pointed at my own property, my driveway, my rebuilt garage, my front yard. None of them captured Bethany's house or windows, though they did record her Escalade when it was illegally blocking my driveway. "Looks like your cameras are properly positioned," Deputy Rodriguez said, adjusting his hat. "Property owners have every right to monitor their own land. But I gotta ask, what's this really about?" I explained the garage situation, the daily parking harassment, Bethany's escalating campaign to force me out of the neighborhood. Rodriguez listened patiently, took notes, and shook his head when I finished. "Sounds like an HOA power trip," the deputy said. "See it all the time. Someone gets a little authority and loses their damn mind. Keep those cameras running and document everything. If she's really harassing you, that evidence will be worth its weight in gold." I thanked him and walked Rodriguez to the door. Through the window, I could see Bethany peeking through her curtains, probably wondering what the police visit was about. The next morning brought a new escalation. I woke up to find orange cones arranged around my driveway and a sign that read, "No parking, fire lane." Bethany had somehow convinced the fire department to designate my entire driveway as a restricted access zone. I called the fire chief, a guy named Murphy, who'd been with the department for 20 years. "We never issued that order," Murphy said, sounding genuinely puzzled. "Someone called claiming to speak for the HOA, said there were access issues in your neighborhood. But we don't just designate fire lanes based on phone calls. Someone's jerking your chain, friend." Murphy agreed to send an engine over to verify that my driveway met all emergency access requirements. When the truck arrived, half the neighborhood came out to watch. The crew measured clearances, checked turning radii, and determined that my driveway actually provided better emergency access than most of the other corner lots. "Whoever called us lied," Murphy told me loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Your driveway meets all fire code requirements. Those cones are coming down right now." As the fire crew removed Bethany's unauthorized barriers, I caught sight of her watching from her living room window. She'd made two critical mistakes: lying to government officials and underestimating how quickly word travels through small neighborhoods. I was about to show her what a real escalation looked like By the third week of Bethany's harassment campaign, I could smell the desperation rolling off her like cheap perfume. Her daily parking blockades had become erratic. Sometimes she'd forget and leave her Escalade in my driveway for hours. Sometimes she'd move it before I even realized it was there. The woman was losing her rhythm, and I knew from construction work that when people lost their rhythm, they made mistakes. The mistake came on a Tuesday morning when I was replacing a broken sprinkler head. I heard voices from the street and looked up to see Bethany talking to Jim Peterson from 3 houses down. I couldn't hear the conversation, but Bethany's hand gestures told the story. Wide arm sweeps toward my property, head shaking. That pursed lip expression she wore when explaining why the world wasn't meeting her standards. 20 minutes later, Jim approached my fence. Jim was a decent guy, retired electrician who'd helped me with the garage wiring. But now, he looked uncomfortable, like someone had asked him to deliver bad news. "Hey, Tank," Jim said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Bethany mentioned some concerns about your situation here. She's organizing a neighborhood safety meeting. Wanted me to let you know." I set down my wrench. "Safety meeting about what?" "She's saying the cameras make people uncomfortable. And there's been talk about the garage blocking sight lines for kids riding bikes." Jim glanced around nervously. "Look, I don't have a dog in this fight, but some folks are starting to worry about property values." I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. "Jim, you know my cameras only record my own property, and kids have been riding bikes past that corner for 30 years without any problems." I know, Jim said quickly. "But Bethany's got people spooked. She's saying if the HOA doesn't take action, the city might get involved. Nobody wants that kind of attention." After Jim left, I stood in my driveway trying to process what had just happened. Bethany had moved beyond direct harassment to recruiting neighbors. She was building a coalition, turning my friends against me with carefully crafted half-truths and imaginary threats. The neighborhood safety meeting happened that Saturday in Bethany's living room. I knew about it because my cameras caught a steady stream of neighbors walking up her driveway around 2 p.m. I counted 12 people, including both Morrison board members and Frank Wilson, who probably had no idea what he was agreeing to support. I didn't get an invitation. Sunday morning brought the results. A formal HOA complaint signed by 8 residents demanding I remove my cameras and relocate my storage structure to comply with community safety standards. The complaint cited documented violations of neighbor privacy and obstruction of emergency vehicle access, both claims that had already been debunked by actual authorities. But I recognized the real genius of Bethany's strategy. She wasn't trying to win on facts anymore. She was counting on the human tendency to avoid conflict, to side with whoever seemed to have the most support. 8 signatures looked impressive until you remembered that Maple Grove had 43 occupied houses. My response was methodical. I printed copies of my property surveys, fire department clearance letter, and camera angle documentation. Then I hand-delivered a response packet to every house in the neighborhood, including a cover letter explaining the actual facts. "I understand there are concerns about my security cameras," I wrote in my neat construction worker handwriting. "I want to clarify that every camera points exclusively at my own property and was installed after repeated harassment and property damage. The attached fire department letter confirms my driveway meets all emergency access requirements. If you have specific concerns, please contact me directly so we can discuss them neighbor to neighbor." The response was immediate. 5 neighbors called or stopped by to apologize, saying they'd been given incomplete information at Bethany's meeting. 3 others expressed outright anger at being manipulated. Mrs. Palmer from 2 streets over brought me a casserole and shared her own horror story about Bethany's attempts to ban her vegetable garden as inconsistent with suburban aesthetics. But my investigation also revealed something more interesting. While researching property records for my response letter, I discovered that Bethany's Escalade was technically registered as a commercial vehicle. Its gross weight exceeded 10,000 pounds, putting it in the same category as delivery trucks and construction equipment. I'd spent 15 years towing commercial vehicles that violated residential parking restrictions. I knew the regulations by heart. Commercial vehicles couldn't park on residential streets overnight without special permits. They couldn't block traffic lanes during peak hours. And they definitely couldn't be used for personal harassment campaigns against neighbors. Bethany had never registered her Escalade with the HOA, and for 3 weeks she'd been using it to systematically violate multiple commercial vehicle ordinances while harassing me about imaginary code violations. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something that might have been Sarah's presence in the room. My late wife had always said that bullies eventually hang themselves with their own rope. You just had to be patient enough to let them do it. The discovery came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when I couldn't sleep and found myself reviewing security footage from the night my garage was destroyed. I'd avoided watching it before. Seeing Sarah's art studio get reduced to debris felt like witnessing her death all over again. But something Deputy Rodriguez said kept nagging at me. Document everything. I made fresh coffee and settled at my kitchen table with my laptop. The timestamp showed October 14th, 11:23 p.m. My driveway was empty, garage standing normal and solid against the night sky. At 2:17 a.m., headlights appeared. A massive tow truck backed into my driveway, diesel engine rumbling low enough to feel in your chest. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. I could make out Iron Horse Towing on the cab door, a company name that seemed familiar but not immediately placeable. The driver jumped down, moved with the efficient precision of someone who'd done this job 1,000 times. He hooked chains to the garage's support posts, tested the connections, then climbed back into the cab. The truck's hydraulic system whined as it lifted the entire structure onto its flatbed. Start to finish, 12 minutes. Professional work. But something bothered me about that company name. Iron Horse Towing. I'd heard it somewhere recently, in a context that didn't make sense for a random towing company to be removing garages at 2 a.m. I opened my business computer and pulled up O'Malley Recovery Services' client database. My company handled overflow work for several larger towing operations, and contractors sometimes subcontracted jobs they couldn't handle. I typed Iron Horse into the search field. The results made my coffee mug freeze halfway to my lips. Iron Horse Towing wasn't just some random company. It was my company. Not directly. I'd acquired it 3 years ago when the original owner retired and couldn't find a buyer. Iron Horse had been a small operation, 2 trucks and a loyal customer base that I hadn't wanted to see disappear. I'd kept the Iron Horse name for their existing clients, maintained their phone number, but integrated everything under my O'Malley Recovery Services management. I owned the company that had demolished Sarah's art studio. With shaking hands, I pulled up my dispatch records from October 14th. There it was. A 1:30 a.m. emergency call to Iron Horse Towing requesting immediate structure removal due to safety hazard. The order had been placed by someone identifying herself as Bethany Mills, authorized HOA representative. The work order was signed and dated. I recognized the signature. I'd seen it on 3 weeks' worth of violation notices. Bethany had called my own company, used my own trucks and my own employees to destroy the last physical connection I had to Sarah. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. The cruel mathematics were impossible to ignore. Bethany had paid me $200 to demolish my own garage. The invoice showed payment by HOA check deposited into my business account the following Monday. I'd profited from my own heartbreak without even knowing it. But as the initial shock faded, I began to see the beautiful irony of the situation. Bethany thought she'd been clever, hiring an outside towing company to do her dirty work. She had no idea she'd just handed me the ultimate proof of her harassment campaign. Every detail was documented in my business files, her signature authorizing the work, the exact time she'd called, even a recording of the phone conversation. I pulled up the dispatch recording and hit play. Bethany's voice came through my speakers, crisp and authoritative. This is an emergency situation. The structure poses an immediate safety hazard and must be removed tonight. Bill the Maple Grove, HOA, attention Bethany Mills. I'm authorizing immediate action under emergency powers. Emergency powers, safety hazard, all lies now preserved forever in my business records. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Bethany had just provided me with everything I needed to destroy her credibility, end her harassment campaign, and probably get her removed from the HOA board. She'd used my own company to attack me. Now I was going to use that same company to end this fight on my terms. My basement had been Sarah's overflow storage space. Canvases she'd finished but hadn't hung, art supplies bought in bulk during sales, reference books filled with sticky notes and marginalia. Since her death, I'd avoided the basement except for laundry, unable to face the reminders of dreams cut short. But now I descended those wooden steps with purpose, Sarah's easel and paints in my arms. Setting up her workspace in my kitchen felt like resurrection. I positioned the easel by the window where morning light would hit it just right, arranged her favorite brushes in the ceramic jar she'd made in college, squeezed fresh paint onto the palette that still held traces of her last painting session. The familiar smell of oils and turpentine filled the house again, and I could almost hear Sarah's voice. Stop overthinking it, Curtis. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. But I wasn't planning to just live well. I was planning to live smart. My first call was to Rita, my dispatcher who'd been with O'Malley Recovery since the beginning. Rita had the organizational skills of a NASA flight controller and the attitude of a bouncer who'd seen everything twice. "Boss, we need to talk about this Iron Horse situation," Rita said when I explained what I'd discovered. "I've been wondering why that Mills woman's voice sounded familiar on the recording. Turns out she's called us 4 times in the past 6 months. I pulled out a legal pad. 4 times for what? Neighbor harassment stuff, mostly. Had us tow a landscaper's truck from Pinecrest Avenue, said it was abandoned. Turned out the guy was just working late. Had us remove a contractor's dumpster from Elm Street, claimed it was illegally placed. The permits were valid, we had to put it back and eat the cost." My pen moved steadily across the paper. "She's been using our company for her personal vendettas." "Gets better," Rita continued. "Remember that weird call about the recreational vehicle parked in front of her house? Turned out to be her neighbor's fishing boat on a trailer. Perfectly legal parking, but she had us hook it up anyway. The neighbor had to pay storage fees to get his boat back." I was beginning to understand the scope of Bethany's operation. She wasn't just harassing me. She was using towing companies as her private enforcement arm against anyone who annoyed her. And my company had been her unwitting accomplice. My next call was to my lawyer, Dave Brennan, who'd handled Sarah's estate and the business incorporation. Dave specialized in small business law, but he had contacts throughout the legal system and a memory like a steel trap. "Curtis, this is fascinating," Dave said after I explained the situation. "Your Ms. Mills has potentially committed fraud, harassment, and what we call false representation to conduct business. When she called your company claiming emergency powers, she was acting beyond her actual authority." I took notes as Dave explained the legal ramifications. HOA compliance officers had limited power, mostly restricted to issuing notices and fines. They couldn't authorize emergency demolitions without board approval, environmental hazards, or immediate safety threats, none of which had existed. "More importantly," Dave continued, "she's created a paper trail of misusing your business services for personal harassment. That's textbook abuse of process. If you can document a pattern, you've got grounds for a civil lawsuit and possibly criminal charges." Dave's advice was methodical. Document everything, preserve all recordings and invoices, gather statements from other affected neighbors, and prepare for a public confrontation that would force Bethany to defend her actions in front of witnesses. My final preparation was the most satisfying. I spent Saturday morning in my garage, studying the hydraulic system I'd installed for my towing business maintenance. I'd always been mechanically inclined. Sarah used to joke that I could fix anything with moving parts, but couldn't operate a coffee maker without instructions. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. My corner lot provided clear sight lines to the entire neighborhood entrance. My security cameras already covered my driveway and the adjacent street. If Bethany wanted to continue her daily parking harassment, I was going to document it with the thoroughness of a federal investigation. But more importantly, I was going to be ready with the perfect response. I'd already spoken with Rita about adjusting the Iron Horse towing service area to include residential parking enforcement. I had every legal right to tow vehicles parked illegally on my property or blocking my driveway. And since I owned the towing company, I could ensure the response time was exactly what the situation required. I set my phone to speed dial Iron Horse Dispatch, positioned my cameras for optimal coverage of the street, and prepared copies of all the documentation Dave had requested. Bethany had spent weeks using my own business against me. Now it was time to return the favor. The neighborhood block party was scheduled for next Saturday. I marked it on my calendar and smiled. Perfect timing for a very public demonstration of how towing companies really work. The week before the block party, Bethany's harassment reached fever pitch. I could practically taste her desperation in the air, metallic and sharp like the smell of overheated brake pads. She'd realized her coalition-building strategy had backfired. Too many neighbors were asking inconvenient questions about her claims, and her credibility was evaporating faster than morning dew on hot asphalt. Monday brought a new escalation. Bethany organized what she called an emergency HOA vote to remove my property rights entirely. She'd somehow convinced the Morrisons that my security cameras constituted a systematic violation of community privacy standards, and that my rebuilt garage was an ongoing safety hazard requiring immediate board action. I learned about the emergency vote from Frank Wilson, the elderly board member who called Tuesday evening sounding confused and apologetic. "Curtis, I don't understand what's happening here," Frank wheezed through the phone. "Bethany's claiming you've been recording people's children and that your garage violates some new city ordinance. But I drove by your place yesterday, and everything looks fine to me." I thanked Frank for the heads up and spent Tuesday night reviewing HOA bylaws. Emergency votes required notification of all affected property owners at least 48 hours in advance. I had received no notification. The vote was scheduled for Thursday evening at Bethany's house, the same living room where she'd held her safety meeting without inviting me. My response was surgical. Wednesday morning, I hand-delivered a legal letter to every board member citing the specific bylaw violations in Bethany's emergency vote procedure. I attached copies of the fire department clearance, camera angle documentation, and a detailed timeline of Bethany's harassment campaign. Any vote conducted without proper notification of affected parties is invalid under Section 7.3 of the HOA governance bylaws, my letter concluded. Furthermore, any board member who participates in an improperly called vote may be subject to personal liability for damages resulting from invalid actions. The emergency vote never happened. Steve Morrison called me Thursday afternoon to say they were postponing the meeting to review procedural requirements. Linda Morrison stopped making eye contact when I drove past their house, but Bethany's next move crossed a line I hadn't expected her to approach. Friday afternoon, I returned from a towing job to find two men in suits standing in my driveway, measuring distances with a laser device. I recognized the type immediately. Code enforcement officers with the officious bearing of people who'd found a violation and were already calculating the fine. "Afternoon, sir," the taller man said, consulting a clipboard. "We received a complaint about unpermitted construction on this property. I'm Officer Martinez with County Code Enforcement. This is Officer Johnson. We need to inspect your garage structure." I invited them to inspect whatever they needed. I'd kept every permit, every inspection certificate, every piece of documentation from the garage reconstruction. Martinez and Johnson measured, photographed, and reviewed my paperwork with professional thoroughness. "Sir, your structure meets all current building codes," Martinez said after 20 minutes. "All permits are valid and current. But I have to ask, who filed this complaint? The person claimed you'd built an illegal addition without permits." I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo of Bethany from the HOA website. Both officers nodded immediately. "That's her," Johnson confirmed. "She filed a complaint claiming you'd built a second-story addition without permits. Said it was visible from the street and blocking her property's natural light." I pointed to my single-story garage. "What second-story addition?" Martinez shook his head. "Sir, this is the third false complaint we've received from that address in the past month. Someone's wasting county resources with fabricated violations. We're going to have to file a report about malicious reporting." After the code enforcement officers left, I sat in my kitchen staring at Sarah's restored easel. Bethany had now lied to the fire department, the sheriff's office, and county code enforcement. She'd escalated from neighborhood harassment to filing false reports with multiple government agencies. That wasn't just petty tyranny anymore. That was criminal behavior. I called Dave Brennan and explained the latest developments. "Curtis, she's handed you everything you need," Dave said. I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "False reporting to government agencies is a misdemeanor. Repeated false reporting shows a pattern that could support harassment charges. And if you can prove she's been systematically abusing your towing services, you've got grounds for a civil suit that could cost her serious money." I made one more call that afternoon, to Rita at dispatch. "Rita, I want you to flag any future calls from Bethany Mills or the Maple Grove HOA. Don't accept any work orders without written authorization and photographic evidence of the situation." "Already done, boss," Rita replied. "That woman's cost us more money in false calls and returned vehicles than she's ever paid in legitimate fees. She's not getting another truck from us without ironclad documentation." Saturday's block party was going to be interesting. I could feel Bethany's options running out like sand through an hourglass. Desperate people made desperate choices, and I intended to be ready for whatever desperation looked like. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made me think of football games and Sarah's apple cider. The neighborhood block party was set to begin at noon, and I could already see residents setting up folding tables and decorating the community pavilion with orange and gold streamers. The smell of charcoal grills drifted through my kitchen windows as I positioned Sarah's finished landscape painting on the easel, her Vermont honeymoon scene, finally completed after 8 months of me staring at it every morning. Bethany's final desperate move came at 11:30 a.m., just as I was getting dressed for the party. Her Escalade roared into my driveway and stopped with deliberate precision, blocking not just my garage access, but positioned diagonally across the entire driveway mouth. She climbed out wearing what my daughter would call a power outfit. Black business suit, high heels, and the kind of jewelry that announced your husband's net worth from 50 yards away. I watched from my kitchen window as Bethany walked to my front door, knocked with the authority of a police raid, then stood with her arms crossed when I didn't immediately answer. I counted to 10, checked my phone to make sure the camera system was recording, and opened the door. "Curtis, we need to settle this situation right now," Bethany announced without preamble. "I'm prepared to make you a reasonable offer for your property. Cash sale, closing within 30 days, no inspections or contingencies." I stepped onto my porch, noting how Bethany had positioned herself to block my path to the driveway. Classic intimidation tactic. Control the physical space to control the conversation. "I'm not selling my house, Bethany. You need to think practically about this," she continued, her voice carrying that practiced real estate agent tone. "Your property values are going to suffer once the HOA implements our new architectural standards. The board voted unanimously last night to require all non-conforming structures to be brought into compliance or removed." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What unanimous vote?" Frank Wilson told me the emergency meeting was canceled. Bethany's smile sharpened. "We held a special session. Frank wasn't feeling well, so we proceeded with the core board members. The Morrisons and I represent a quorum under emergency circumstances." I knew enough about HOA governance to recognize the lie. 3-member quorums required specific language in the bylaws, and Maple Grove's charter required all 5 board members for any vote affecting individual properties. But Bethany was counting on me not knowing the legal details. "The offer is $340,000, she continued. "That's $15,000 above the assessed value. You'll never get a better deal, especially once word spreads about the compliance issues." I looked past Bethany to her Escalade, noting how she'd angled it to ensure maximum visibility from the street. Neighbors walking to the block party would see the confrontation, see her expensive SUV blocking my driveway, see me apparently cornered on my own front porch. She was staging this conversation as a public demonstration of her power. "Here's what's going to happen," I said quietly. "You're going to move your vehicle off my property, then you're going to walk away and never contact me about selling my house again." Bethany laughed, the sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Or what? You'll call the police? File another complaint? Curtis, you need to understand that I have connections in this county. Real connections. People listen when I raise concerns about problem residents." I pulled out my phone. "Rita, it's me. I need a truck at my address for vehicle removal. Commercial vehicle illegally blocking private property access." 10-4, boss. "Truck's already in the area for the community event. ETA 3 minutes. Bethany's confident expression flickered. "What truck? What are you talking about?" "Iron Horse Towing," I said, watching understanding slowly dawn in her eyes. "You remember Iron Horse, don't you? The company you called to demolish my garage? The one you've used to harass my neighbors?" The color drained from Bethany's face. "You can't. That's not... You don't own..." "Oh, but I do." I held up my phone, showing her the O'Malley Recovery Services business license. "Acquired Iron Horse 3 years ago. Every call you made, every false emergency report, every harassment job you ordered, you were hiring my company." I could hear the rumble of the approaching tow truck, see neighbors stopping their block party preparations to watch the confrontation. Bethany looked frantically between her illegally parked Escalade and my calm expression, finally realizing she'd walked into a trap of her own making. "The beautiful irony," I continued, "is that you're about to pay me to tow your own vehicle, just like you paid me to demolish my own garage, except this time, everyone's going to watch it happen." The Iron Horse truck rounded the corner, diesel engine announcing its arrival to the entire neighborhood. I waved to Jerry, my driver, and pointed to the Escalade blocking my driveway. Bethany's final overreach was about to become her public downfall, courtesy of the company she'd been unknowingly hiring to destroy her victims. The trap was set. Now came the spring. The Iron Horse tow truck pulled up with the theatrical timing of a Hollywood finale. Jerry Martinez climbed down from the cab, clipboard in hand, while 43 neighbors abandoned their block party setup to witness what was about to become Maple Grove legend. I walked calmly to the center of my driveway, positioning myself where everyone could see and hear clearly. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with barbecue smoke as Jerry began his professional assessment of the situation. "Commercial vehicle illegally parked on private property," Jerry announced loud enough for the growing crowd. "Weight class exceeds residential parking limits, owner present and refusing to move upon request." Bethany stood frozen beside her Escalade, looking like someone who'd just realized they'd brought a knife to a gunfight. I could see her mind working, trying to find an angle, a threat, some way to regain control of the situation. "Curtis, you can't do this," she said, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "This is harassment. This is retaliation for legitimate HOA business." I pulled out a manila folder thick with documentation. "Jerry, before you start the hookup, I want to read something to everyone here. This is a recording from October 14th, 2:30 a.m. My phone speaker crackled as Bethany's voice filled the sudden silence. "This is an emergency situation. The structure poses an immediate safety hazard and must be removed tonight. Bill the Maple Grove HOA, attention Bethany Mills." The crowd murmured as I continued. That was Bethany calling Iron Horse Towing to demolish my garage while I was visiting my daughter. She authorized emergency demolition of my late wife's art studio, claiming safety hazards that didn't exist. Frank Wilson stepped forward from the crowd, his elderly voice carrying clearly. "Bethany, you told the board that garage removal was ordered by the city. You never mentioned hiring a towing company." "I had authority," Bethany shouted, desperation making her voice crack. "The HOA bylaws give the compliance officer emergency powers." I opened my folder and pulled out a legal document. "Actually, they don't. This is Section 12.4 of our HOA charter, which clearly states that emergency actions require board approval or documented safety hazards verified by city officials. You had neither." Wow. Jerry had finished positioning his truck and was now attaching chains to the Escalade's front axle. The metallic clink of the hookup echoed through the neighborhood as Bethany watched her escape route literally being lifted off the ground. "But here's the beautiful part," I continued, my voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd been patient long enough. "Every time Bethany used my towing company to harass neighbors, she was paying me to be her own worst enemy. The Henderson's landscaper truck, $80 tow fee to my account, Mrs. Rodriguez's contractor dumpster, $120 removal fee, Mr. Peterson's fishing boat, $60 hookup charge." I could see neighbors doing the math, realizing they'd been victims of the same systematic harassment. Mrs. Palmer stepped forward with her arms crossed. "You had my son's car towed from our own driveway," she said to Bethany. "Claimed it was abandoned. He had to pay $200 to get it back." "That's extortion," called out Jim Peterson, "using towing companies like your personal enforcement arm." Deputy Rodriguez appeared at the edge of the crowd, apparently responding to calls about the disturbance. I waved him over and handed him the folder. "Deputy, I've got documentation of systematic false reporting to multiple agencies, harassment and misuse of business services for personal vendettas, all signed, dated, and recorded." Rodriguez flipped through the papers, his expression growing more serious with each page. "Ma'am," he said to Bethany, "I need you to step away from the vehicle. We're going to need to have a conversation about these complaints." The Escalade rose slowly into the air, hydraulics whining as Jerry's truck lifted all four wheels off my driveway. The crowd applauded spontaneously, and I felt something I hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, the warm satisfaction of justice served publicly and completely. "For anyone keeping score," I announced to the assembled neighborhood, "Bethany paid my company $1,200 to demolish my garage, then spent 3 weeks harassing me about imaginary code violations while illegally parking her commercial vehicle in my driveway. The irony is so perfect, my late wife would have painted it." I looked directly at Bethany as Deputy Rodriguez approached her with handcuffs. "You wanted to know who owns the towing company? The answer is Curtis O'Malley, Iron Horse Towing, and O'Malley Recovery Services. And lady, your account is seriously overdue." The crowd erupted in cheers as Jerry's truck pulled away with Bethany's Escalade swaying gently on the lift bed. I stood in my reclaimed driveway, surrounded by neighbors who'd finally seen the neighborhood bully brought down by her own weapons. The block party was about to get a lot more interesting. 801-800. 3 weeks after the block party, I sat in my kitchen watching Sarah's restored landscape catch the morning light. The house felt different now. Not empty, but expectant, like something new was about to begin. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the familiar scent of oil paints as I worked on my own first painting in 30 years, a portrait of the neighborhood on the day justice came calling. Bethany's legal troubles had unfolded with the inexorable logic of dominoes falling. Deputy Rodriguez's investigation revealed a pattern of false reporting that spanned 2 counties and 6 months. The district attorney charged her with harassment, filing false police reports, and what turned out to be a fascinating case of commercial fraud through impersonation of authority. Turned out, claiming emergency powers you don't possess while hiring services under false pretenses was a bigger legal problem than anyone expected. The Escalade had cost Bethany $1,247 in towing and storage fees, paid to my company, naturally. Her resignation from the HOA board came via a lawyer's letter, along with a formal apology and reimbursement for my garage reconstruction costs. The lawyer had been very clear that Mrs. Mills would not be contesting any civil claims and hoped to resolve all outstanding issues amicably and expeditiously. I accepted the money but donated half to the county domestic violence shelter. Sarah would have approved of that decision. The HOA board restructuring happened quickly once Frank Wilson called a legitimate emergency meeting. Steve and Linda Morrison resigned rather than face questions about their role in Bethany's schemes, leaving Frank to work with 3 newly elected neighbors who actually understood the difference between community governance and personal vendettas. The new board's first action was establishing the Sarah O'Malley Memorial Art Fund, using recovered fees from Bethany's illegal activities to provide art supplies for local schools. I had suggested the name during a board meeting that actually included all affected residents, and the unanimous vote felt like the first good decision Maple Grove had made in months. My security camera footage had become evidence in 2 other harassment cases involving Bethany's previous neighborhoods. Apparently, getting elected to HOA positions and then abusing the power was her signature move. I felt sorry for her next community, assuming anyone would sell her a house once word spread about her legal troubles. The most unexpected development was Mrs. Palmer's revelation that she'd been documenting HOA harassment for over a year. Her meticulous records, combined with my business files and security footage, were being used by a legal aid organization to help other HOA abuse victims. I had become an accidental expert on fighting back against petty tyranny, and my phone rang regularly with requests for advice. Jerry Martinez had quit Iron Horse to start his own towing company, with my blessing and a strong reference letter. "Boss," Jerry had said on his last day, "I want to work for someone who uses towing to help people, not hurt them." I had given him 2 of Iron Horse's older trucks and a customer list of legitimate businesses that needed reliable service. The neighborhood block party had become a monthly tradition, with me providing coffee from Sarah's vintage percolator and neighbors bringing enough food to feed a construction crew. Kids rode their bikes safely past my garage, which now sported a small memorial garden where Sarah's art studio used to be. I had started teaching basic legal rights workshops in my garage, showing neighbors how to document harassment, understand HOA bylaws, and recognize when authority figures were overstepping their bounds. The workshops were well attended, and I discovered I enjoyed teaching almost as much as I'd enjoyed construction work. But the best part of my new life was the phone call that came every Sunday morning from my daughter Katie in Columbus. She'd heard about the confrontation through neighborhood gossip chains and called to say she was proud of me for fighting back. "Mom always said you were too polite for your own good," Katie had laughed during our last conversation, "but I think she'd be proud of how you handled that awful woman." I thought she was right. Sarah had always believed that bullies counted on good people staying silent, and that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to be a victim. As I put the finishing touches on my neighborhood portrait, I realized something had changed in the past month. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt ready for whatever came next, and I was ready too.